Good afternoon. Welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We're pleased to have Mr. Dexter Van Zile, Managing Editor of MEF's Focus on Western Islamism, join us to discuss, is CAIR on the ropes? Mr. Van Zile and I will converse for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I'll turn our discussion to the topic at hand. All right, so Dexter, earlier this month, the Biden administration issued a powerful rebuke on the Council on American-Islamic Relations after the Middle East Media Research Institute published the video of Nihad Awad, the group's national director, of applauding the October 7th attack on Israel. White House spokesman Andrew Bates declared, "We condemn these shocking anti-Semitic statements in the strongest terms," and removed CAIR's name from a campaign established to counter anti-Semitism in the United States. This isn't the first time, however, that CAIR officials have made statements like this. It's not as if Awad's remarks had differed from CAIR's usual message. Why did the Biden administration act now?
I think the main reason why the Biden administration acted in response to this controversy was because of the horror of the October 7th attack. Historically, ever since World War II, and there is still some vestige and remnant of this attitude, people generally saw open expressions of anti-Semitism historically as basically just outrageous and something that was wrong, largely as a consequence of the fact that a significant number of young men were forced to essentially defeat Nazism, which was a clearly anti-Semitic movement, and basically cost, thousands of American people their lives. My father was one of those people, and so historically it's kind of a generational thing. The people who were alive and know their history about World War II, when they saw the violence that took place on October 7th, this really raised fear and concern on their part. And so essentially anybody that supported it, and I don't want to say that unfortunately, this outrage is not across the board. It's not across the board. But on the part of some people, people who grew up in the shadow of World War II or during it, they will understand that essentially that what happened on October 7th was just horrifying. It was a pogrom that was kind of that combined the worst elements of anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism. It was a combination of essentially like a Hebron attack and Babi Yar, like in the ravine, and that was essentially people who were of a certain age, so to speak, they got it. And the Biden administration, I think Joe Biden, he comes from that generation and he understood it. And he, I think, responded with essentially a visceral objection to it, which I think was a very good thing. And the thing is that one of the things that, and I in my interactions with people know the job that I have. There were a lot of people who were on the center left, my age and older, that were always a little bit kind of suspicious of the work that I did because I did a lot of pro-Israel work. But October 7th basically woke them up and said, "This is terrible." And they actually had a willingness to actually listen to what I had to say. And I think that was really what happened as a consequence of October 7th. And I don't want to state the impact because I don't think that we can bank on this outrage staying in place forever, but it is a reality for now. So I think that's why, CAIR has been saying and doing things, and CAIR activists and staffers have been saying outrageous things about Israel and Jews since it was founded. And you can see that in the article that I wrote about Nihad Awad and how he needs to actually be, forced out of his position at CAIR for it to have any credibility as a civil rights organization. They've been saying this stuff. They've been doing these things for decades, since 1994. But the thing is that the October 7th massacre reawakened people's historical memories. I think that's what's going on.
Absolutely. Thank you. Congress has been particularly supportive of Israel despite Islamist activism against Israel. In late October, for example, the House of Representatives passed a pro-Israel resolution by a vote of 412 to 1. In late November, the House passed a resolution calling Hamas to release the hostages it took on October 7th and affirmed Israel's right to exist. Moreover, the House passed a resolution declaring that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, a resolution that passed by a vote of 311 to 12. Just how much influence does CAIR have on the American politics on a national level? Is it really worth trying to, or is it really worth worrying about?
Yeah, I think that the Council on American-Islamic Relations, I don't think that they're going to be able to essentially, they're going to have supporters clearly on the left and in the Democratic Party, and there are going to be some people on the far right who hate Israel and distrust Jews, who are essentially going to basically either be okay with the CAIR's rhetoric about Israel and Jews. But the thing is that as far as like on a national level, they're not really going to be able to generate the type of opposition, I don't think, in the near term to essentially basically stymie American support for Israel. The problem is that I think one of the things that we can see is that what they've done is that they have provided cover for a campaign or even just an attitude on the part of Islamists in the United States that basically hinder the integration of minorities in the United States, incite conflict between ethnic groups, and foster hatred towards a particular group of people in the United States, namely American Jews. And the thing is that they're doing this even as they somehow try to portray themselves as being opponents of anti-Semitism. And the problem is that I think that this is a bigger threat than we've been used to thinking about, because I think what it does is that you know, Elham Ania and Ayaan Hirsi Ali have both written books about the decline and the status of and safety of women in Europe as a result of immigration. And it wasn't as big of an emphasis in Elham Ania's most recent text, but it was discussed in it. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she wrote a book called Pray that talked about this. One of the things that I think we have to be very clear about is that we're not nearly as far along as the process is in Europe. But there are places in Europe where essentially Islamism and its support on the part of Muslim immigrant populations has really made life unsafe for growing numbers of women in Europe, and also basically Jews as well, clearly. And that's really one of the things that I see. And just recently, I had a conference call with one of our reporters who said that, look, the Diyanet from Turkey is basically promoting hostility towards Christians who support Israel in Europe as well, and they're going after the Christian Zionist community. You see a lot of that type of activism, not to the, and I don't want to say that it's as aggressive, but you see that on the part of some Islamist organizations here in the United States, and in some instances, it is as aggressive. And so what has happened is that I think that they're helping to basically disintegrate or cause the dissolution of American civil society, and CAIR, by portraying itself as a civil rights organization that's affirming and protecting the rights of Muslims in the United States, while at the same time promoting hostility towards Jews, quite clearly, and Israel. What that does is that it essentially is going to basically promote feelings of distrust, particularly, I think, in urban life. And I think that's really one of the things that's very bothersome. And so I think that's really crucial. And we need to figure out a way to stop people dealing with CAIR as if it is the gatekeeper or the legitimate representative of American Muslims.
Thank you. So you just mentioned urban life. What is CAIR's place in American Muslim institutional life?
Well, you see, now that's really one of the concerns that I have is that I think for people to live together in safety, we need to basically to know that the interactions that we have, urban existence and American life is largely an urban phenomenon. It's not entirely, but it's largely an urban phenomenon, and people don't know each other. And what happens is that when you walk down the street in a large city, you would like to be able to have the sense that you can have safe interactions with people and not actually deal with any sort of hostility. And the problem is that the injection of Islamist hostility towards Jews into a civil society has knock-on effects. It promotes distrust on the part of all Americans towards one another because it basically makes life more difficult and unsafe in urban environments. And the thing is that CAIR's place in American Muslim institutional life is that they are the gatekeepers. They are essentially, they've established themselves as the go-to organization or gatekeeper of Muslim communities in the United States. And the problem is that part of this is because it's well organized and it's been around for a long time and it's well connected and it's treated with unwarranted credibility by the press. Now, that was one of the reasons why the Biden's rebuke of CAIR was so astonishing, because it forced people in the media community to essentially address essentially CAIR's overall agenda and their hostility towards Israel. The problem is that I don't think over the long haul that that's going to stop the demand for what CAIR has to say about Israel and what other Islamist organizations have to say about Israel. There is a significant number of young people in the United States who want to hear exactly the type of rhetoric that Nihad Awad offered when he was speaking to American Muslims for Palestine. And I'm not just talking about young Muslims, but I'm talking about young people on the left, adherents of the woke movement, that want to basically imbibe a certain anti-Western, anti-Israel narrative so that they can feel like that they're on the right side of history. And essentially, that's one of the reasons why CAIR is in message is so dangerous and so bothersome, is because it's treated as if it's an established organization, and it is. And it's treated as if and it's given unwarranted credibility by people. That's why when Biden condemned them, it might provide an opening on the part of its opponents in American civil society to say, look, we need to draw a cordon sanitaire around CAIR and other Islamist organizations and say, this is intolerable, we won't have it. So.
Thank you. So might the White House rebuke represent a turning point for CAIR, or is it just another bump in the road? Is CAIR on the ropes?
Well, I think first of all, it's a bad hit, okay, for them, and it's a bad look. And if we take proper advantage of it, I think that we can actually work on it and really actually work to marginalize it. But I don't want to oversell the impact that we're going to be able to have. I'd like to think that we can marginalize it. A long time ago, I used to deal with an organization called Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Community, Sabeel, led by Naim Atik, a Palestinian Christian. And one of the things that I did personally was I went on basically kind of a one-man crusade, if you pardon the expression, to essentially marginalize Sabeel. And the thing was, is that essentially, once people saw that Sabeel's rhetoric was really over the top, there were a few people that basically backed away from it and said, we don't want to have any more to do with Sabeel. The problem is that there was still a large number of people in the community where Sabeel was influential that had a demand for that. They had a hunger for the type of rhetoric that Sabeel offered. And I think that is probably going to remain in effect, even if somehow we were able to take a substantial chunk out of CAIR's influence. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but the thing is, this is a long-term fight that's probably going to last a generation. And I think and we have to start thinking about how do we marginalize this movement? How do we marginalize Islamism in American society? And how do we marginalize groups like CAIR? And I think that's something we really have to think about.
Absolutely. So what can we do to marginalize CAIR further?
Okay. Now, I think one of the mistakes that sometimes I have been most guilty of is that I responded to strategic threats as a moral and ethical problem. Okay. When I saw that people were promoting hostility towards Jews in the United States and also towards Israel, I said, this is unethical, it's wrong, it's morally bad, and people shouldn't do it. And everything that I said, I think, was true on a level, but the thing is that the message that Islamist organizations like CAIR and others like it, it's not just a moral or ethical disgrace, but it's a strategic threat. And we need to respond to strategic threats in a strategic manner. And that is really one of the challenges that I have been dealing with since I've been at the Middle East Forum, is how do you deal with these things on a strategic level? What do you do? And I think one of the things that we can do is, rather than actually just say this is a moral and ethical disgrace, what we need to do is we need to say it's a strategic threat to American society to have people promoting this type of hostility towards Israel and towards Jews. Because and one of the arguments that I've made again and again was that the techniques used to delegitimize the Israel have been deployed against the United States as well. I think one of the strategic responses is not to always emphasize the moral and ethical problems associated with Islamism, but to just point out the impact that it has on people's self-interest and their well-being. And if we can portray this as like CAIR's anti-Semitism as uncouth. And right now I'm relying a little bit, I'm trying to slog my way through a book called The Civilizing Process by a guy by the name of Norbert Elias. And he talked about from the Middle Ages on, there was essentially this process by which essentially people learned to live together in larger, more complex societies. For example, at the dinner table, they wouldn't wave the knife around at one another when they were trying to make a point, because essentially the knife was kind of a threatening gesture. And so and that was just one, and I'm using that as a metaphor. For example, you didn't take a bread that you'd bitten out of and dip it into the communal bit of soup. And rather than actually jump up and down and talk about how anti-Semitism is a moral and ethical failing, you could say, look, this is uncouth, and it's actually going to undermine our ability to live together in a complex, large society, and we cannot let this type of hostility be facilitated and promoted. And we actually have to learn how to basically exhibit a certain level of disdain towards the people and say, is this really the message that you guys want to be offering? And if we say to CAIR, look, you're portraying yourself as a civil rights institution, and here you are basically speaking in a manner that demonizes Jews, that's kind of a contradiction. And not just say that it's unethical and that it's wrong, but to muster the type of disdain to say, look, this is just not right, and make it clear to people that if they participate in this type of campaign, that they're not going to be, welcome in the upper echelons of American society. That's really what it is. Because the people who operate these institutions, they have a number of different issues. One, they're clearly ideologically committed to their cause, but secondly, they're looking for power and influence. And what we're going to have to do is basically make it clear that, look, if you want to advocate legitimately for Muslim rights in American society, and advocate for people's rights under the constitutional order, great. But you cannot engage in this type of defamation of Israel and of Jews, and that essentially you're going to have to, behave the way the rest of us are expected to behave as well. And and people might be a little put out by the idea of saying this is uncivilized, that this is uncouth, and that this is not how reasonable people should behave. But I think that once that, if we can get that example set, that I think that what will happen is it will flow down into the American society writ large.
Certainly hope so. So last question for me. You've written about CAIR's attempt to portray itself as an opponent of anti-Semitism, even while it has affirmed hostility towards Israel and Jewish institutions. Pollsters recently announced that more than 2/3 of Americans between the age of 18 and 24 regard Jews as oppressors and declare they should be treated as such. And students on college campuses appear to be taking Hamas's side in the conflict. The condemnation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism as moral and ethical failings doesn't seem to work. What should we do? What's the strategic threat we face, and what's the strategic response?
Okay, I think one of the interesting things about people have asked me about what happened at during the congressional hearings with the presidents from MIT, UPenn, and Harvard. And one of the questions that comes up is whether or not this is protected speech or not. And I think that that's a legitimate question that people need to argue about. But I think the real question is, can we have our chief institutions that are responsible for elite formation in the United States basically being overrun by people who are trying to create a ghetto bench and drive Jews from the public square? And is that sustainable? And the answer is absolutely not. It is not sustainable. We simply cannot have people going around behaving as if, as if they're essentially like, Palestinian activists in the West Bank of the Gaza Strip screaming bloody murder about Jews or Israel. That's just intolerable. And the thing is that we have it, but what we need to do is we need to make it very clear to the people who run these institutions that that's not acceptable, and that their status and their influence in American society is going to take a beating if they continue to allow this to happen. And we need to basically make them clear that they are not allowed to essentially facilitate this type of uncouth, hostile behavior towards our fellow citizens. And also, if they're going to take, when they take money from gutter, and one of the things that ISGAP, one of the institutions that you read every once in a while, they have documented the manner in which money from gutter has basically had a negative impact on the intellectual life of these institutions, okay, and made life less safe for Jews. And it's made the real threat to open and free expression does not really come from people who are trying to stop people from chanting from the river to the sea, but it's from the people who are essentially working very hard to intimidate Jews and supporters of Israel on college campuses. And the thing is that I think we can make a very clear message to everybody who runs these institutions, whether or not it's UPenn, MIT, Harvard, or UMass Boston, that look, we're not paying you money to allow you to basically to allow for the radicalization of our workforce. What we're looking for is people to actually come out of these schools to be able to function properly. And what we're seeing on campuses now indicates that you're not doing the job, and we will hold you accountable if you don't do it right. That's my response.
Thank you so much. So we're going to go to some questions here from the audience. Larry Greenberg asked, you were speaking about Qatar's funding. Is it possible to document and expose the extent of the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, Turkish, Qatari, et cetera, financing and infiltration in the United States?
I hope so. And I think that one of the things that we have been able to do is to document the amount of public support that has gone, and also charitable support that's gone to Islamist organizations here in the United States. Sam Westrup is essentially, the answer to that question is ask Sam Westrup. And the thing is that we have a tougher time doing it in Europe, but I don't think it's because the data isn't available. It's just because of the mechanics. And I think that's really the next question. When we start to deal with researchers in Europe, we're going to say, look, we need to document the financial support that these institutions are getting from overseas and also from institutions here in the United States. And the problem is that one of the problems that we've discovered, and that has been discovered, is that some institutions in the United States are not properly reporting the money that they're getting from overseas, and they need to be held accountable for that.
Thank you. Stephen Orlow states the administration's anti-Semitism panel adopted both the IHRA and the much weaker Nexus definition of anti-Semitism. The latter was at the behest of CAIR. Can that Nexus definition now be eliminated as an accepted definition of anti-Semitism by the administration, and will MEF push for that elimination? Will CAIR lose its 5013C tax status?
All right. First of all, I have great fantasies about being able to marginalize CAIR, and so yes, I would like to think that's the case. One of the things that I would like to see is that I would like to see every time a CAIR staffer shows up at a local state house in any one of the 50 states, that somebody in that body challenges them about the evil things that Nihad Awad has said about Israel. And as far as changing and removing that definition, I hope so. I think that, and I don't know whether or not the Middle East Forum will support that. I can't speak on behalf of the institution. I'm just one staffer. And can we remove their 501c3? Another fantasy of mine, another hope of mine, is to basically have CAIR staffers brought before Congress and said, okay, you're basically taking money from the U.S. taxpayer, either directly from the government in some instances, or you're actually, being subsidized by taxpayers who have to pay more because of the result of the tax-deductible donations made to you. Do the things that come out of your mouth, do they jibe with that? Because if you're going to be part of our 501c3 system, you would think that you would have an obligation to essentially not work in a way that undermines the American Republic. And when you start to speak evil against Israel and Jews the way that you undermine the ability of people to live together in peace. And we've seen that process play itself out on college campuses time and time again. We have the equivalent of ghetto benches, which is a phrase used to describe what happened to Jews in Poland in the 1930s. They made all the Jews stay on one side of the classroom, basically to marginalize them and to isolate them. The thing is that when you do that, you undermine all of our abilities to live in peace with one another, because people are going to wonder, one, they learn that strategy works, and two, they're going to wonder if they're going to be the next one. And the thing is that we're headed towards a European model of interfaith, interscene warfare if we're not careful. And Congress has every right and an obligation to essentially hold CAIR accountable for the statements of its leaders and say, why are you taking taxpayers' dollars if you have such contempt for the rules that come with the American Republic?
Thank you. Rosin Michael Shorenstein asks, how can we fight against Islamophobia as used to prevent legitimate criticism of Islamists?
Well, first of all, I've written a lot about this. And I think we need to come up with a very good script. And I've already got that script, and I'm reviewing it now. It's going to be, if you think that people talking about the mistreatment of Jews and Christians in Muslim majority environments is Islamophobic, you're going to think I'm an Islamophobe. If you think talking about the status of women in Muslim majority environments and expressing concern about that is Islamophobic, you're going to think I'm an Islamophobe. And if you think that the impact that Islamist organizations, the negative impact that Islamist organizations are having on the ability of Muslims to live in peace in Western democracies is Islamophobic, you're going to think I'm an Islamophobe. But I think every one of those concerns is absolutely legitimate, and it's not an irrational fear. And I want to talk about these things in a way that does not incite hostility towards Jews in general. If you see the article I recently published at Focus on Western Islamism, I made it perfectly clear that I do not want to live in a society in which Muslims can be harassed, bullied, shot, stabbed, or beat up for any reason. But at the same time, I fully expect and demand that any Muslim organization that advocates for Muslim rights does not engage in the type of behavior that causes anybody else to be targets of that same type of violence. And that is what CAIR has done.
Thank you. So we have a few questions to wrap this up. George Goldberg asks, multiple people have asked this. George Goldberg states, is there an organization in the United States that promotes Muslim interests without being anti-Israel and anti-Jewish?
I think Zuhdi Jasser is one of the leaders, and I don't have the exact name of the organization before me, but I don't want to exaggerate the strength of that movement, and I don't mean to disparage the moderate Muslims and the reform-minded Muslims that are working on it. I think that this is really one of the concerns that we have to raise, is that we have to challenge Muslims to say, look, Okay, CAIR does not represent your interest, and there are people who are basically, working to change that, like Muslims Against Anti-Semitism. But do you really listen to these folks? And which we have to ask them, which side are you on? Are you on the side of democracy and of liberty and equality before the law? And also, what type of God do you worship? And that's a legitimate question to ask people in the public square in the United States. Because that's really, once we challenge the local imams and say, do you promote the understanding of a God that promotes hostility towards Jews and Christians and democracy and promotes the subjugation of women? Okay, is that a compassionate, loving, and merciful God that you proclaim? Or do you promote something different? And I think that's really what we have to do. And yes, there are institutions, and I can email you with those, but I don't want to exaggerate their influence, because CAIR and the other, ICNA, Muslim American Society, Muslim Ummah of North America, they're the ones that essentially are the gatekeepers right now. And we need to see that change.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you, Dexter, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Of course, for our viewers, please join us on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.